Coming up on Network Africa, Cote d'Ivoire's ruling party warns opposition leaders against any attempt to destabilize the country. Uganda's Electoral Commission paves the way for incumbent President Yoweri Museveni to begin official campaigns for the 2021 elections. Plus, the First Lady of Zimbabwe, Auxilia Mnangagwa, denies any link to gold smuggling in the country. Hello and welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Adegoke. We begin with news and happenings that made headlines over the weekend.
On Saturday, voting started in Cote d'Ivoire as President Alassane Ouattara seeks a third-term mandate. The streets of the commercial capital, Abidjan, were quiet and largely empty in contrast to the sometimes violent run-up to the election, which is seen as a test of stability in the country. After casting his ballot, President Ouattara appealed for calm after voting in the district of Cote. In a presidential election, he's seeking a third term, causing a call from two rival candidates to boycott the vote. Ouattara, seen as likely to win, says he's allowed to run again under a new constitution approved in 2016, and is doing so only because his hand-picked successor died unexpectedly in July. Witnesses say voting proceeded smoothly at a number of polling stations in Abidjan, and polls closed as scheduled, and vote counting started soon after at 6 p.m. On Sunday, Algerians voted in a referendum on a new constitution, but early turnout figures suggested little enthusiasm for changes intended by the government to turn the page on last year's political unrest. President Abdelmajid Tebboune and the powerful military have pushed the referendum, but many in a mass protest movement that shook Algeria last year have opposed the vote as a sham. Officials had announced participation of only 13% by 2 p.m., 5 hours before polls closed. Still on Sunday, Egypt announced official results of the first round of parliamentary elections, with the turnout reaching 28.6% of total voters. Head of the country's National Election Commission, Ibrahim Lashin, said over 9 million voters in 14 governorates participated in the election. A second round is to take place in November 7 till 8th, and runoffs will take place in late November and early December. The polls are being held with a new electoral law under which 50% of 568 contested seats will be allocated to pre-selected lists that take all the seats in an electoral area if they win a majority of votes.
To our main stories now, the ruling party in Cote d'Ivoire has warned opposition leaders against any attempts to destabilize the country after they rejected Saturday's election in which President Alassane Ouattara stood for a controversial third term. The opposition, which boycotted the poll, has called for mass protests to block what they describe as an electoral coup. They also said they wanted a civil transition to pave the way for later elections. Mr. Ouattara has taken a commanding early lead, winning 99% of the vote in some ruling party strongholds. More than 16 people were killed in political violence before and during the election. Mr. Ouattara announced he was running again after his party's chosen successor suddenly died in July. Well, let's get more on this story from a journalist in Cote d'Ivoire, Liandou Bassompierre. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Network Africa. Tell us, how was Saturday's election?
Well, the streets of Abidjan were largely peaceful, but it's in the rest of the country that we saw isolated incidents of violence across the country. 5 deaths reported so far, hundreds more injured in skirmishes between opposition supporters. We're still waiting for the tally of the votes. They started announcing some preliminary results late yesterday. They just announced a few more, and President Alassane Ouattara leading the vote in 47 of 108 districts in the country. Final results expected possibly later this evening. Observer missions are starting to give their final analysis, or preliminary analysis rather, on the day of the vote, saying that the one particular observer mission, the Cote Center, saying earlier today that there was not the political situation in the country didn't allow for elections taking place in the manner that in which it was supposed to have taken place, obviously because the opposition had largely boycotted Saturday's vote.
Yes, and today what has been the situation, especially for the opposition calling for mass protests?
Well, there hasn't been that big of an uptake, at least in the economic capital, Abidjan, for their calls for these mass protests. There, of course, there's been a very heavy security presence, 35,000 security agents deployed across the country to secure the votes, and there remains a very heavy police and army presence throughout the country. There was a curfew that was put in place in the capital, Yamoussoukro, for 3 days to try to allay some of the violence that we've seen there in recent days as well.
And how are opposition parties reacting to what the ruling party said, warning them that they should not attempt to destabilize the country?
There was a very strong warning from the ruling party late yesterday saying that the opposition calls for further protests and further destabilization will ultimately lead to the instability of this country. It was not too long ago that we saw the civil war after the end of the 2010 elections, of course, triggered by then President Laurent Gbagbo refusing to concede defeat. They haven't given an actual plan for the transitional government that they've requested. They said yesterday in a press conference that they would like this transitional government to be able to prepare fresh elections that will be free and fair. It remains to be seen what their next steps will be.
I also want to ask you about former President Laurent Gbagbo. We know he spoke just before the election talking about a catastrophe if, all the parties don't come together. Has he said anything after the elections on Saturday?
Well, that interview with TV5 Monde on Thursday came after a very long silence. Of course, the opposition were hoping that that interview would possibly get more people out into the streets and more people rallying for their cause, possibly for negotiations to take place. But as we know, the election took place on Saturday. In any case, he has not had anything to say since then, but his wife, on the contrary, took to giving a video conference on Saturday saying that she's also calling for a transitional government along with the other opposition parties.
All right, Leon, just finally, before I let you go, what is the mood between citizens, even as, they are expecting the results?
Well, the feeling is that the participation was quite low, and so I think people are on tenterhooks to know what the actual participation was. We know that in some voting districts, people were not able to vote because opposition supporters actually stopped them from going into the voting stations. So while we await the announcement from the Electoral Commission on what the participation was like, and then, of course, the results after, the city, at least in Abidjan, remains very tense as the nation awaits the results.
All right, then, Liandou Bassompierre, journalist in Abidjan, thank you so much for speaking to us. Well, in East Africa, police in Tanzania have confirmed the arrest of several opposition figures, including the chairperson of the Chadema party, Freeman Mbowe, ahead of Monday's planned protests. Police say the arrested politicians wanted to disrupt peace while protesting against the results of last week's elections. The Chadema and Act Wazalendo parties have called for mass action from Monday to demand fresh elections. Incumbent President John Magufuli, he was declared winner with 84% of the vote. His Chadma Cha Mapinduzi party also won an overwhelming majority in parliament. Still talking politics, Uganda's Electoral Commission has cleared incumbent President Yoweri Museveni to begin official campaigns for the elections scheduled for January 2021. Mr. Museveni has ruled the country since 1986, when he rose to power through an armed struggle. A law passed in 2017 removed the constitutional age limit for presidential candidates, making it possible for Mr. Museveni, who is 76 years old, to run again. So far, 10 aspirants are vying for the top job, including musician turned opposition politician Robert Kyagulanyi, who's also known as Bobby Wine. Well, back here in Nigeria, 11 people have been reportedly killed in Chibok town, Borno State, northeast of the country. Local sources say 9 women were also abducted in the incident, which occurred in Takulashi village. The insurgents reportedly attacked mourners attending a funeral 15 kilometers to the local government headquarters. Villagers say the insurgents opened fire on the residents, targeting and killing men, after which they seemed to carefully select the women they abducted. Chibok town is famous for the abduction of over 200 schoolgirls in 2014, and the town has continued to suffer a series of attacks across its villages.
Yeah! One, yeah! Two, yeah! Three, yeah! Four, yeah! Five.
Well, personnel of the new Police Special Weapons and Tactics Unit SWAT have begun receiving fresh training in tactical skills and are being asked to be good ambassadors of the force. The charge is coming from the Minister of Police Affairs, Mohammed Dingyadi, during a visit to the offices at the Police Mobile Training College in Nasarawa State. He assured the personnel that the federal government is working on an improvement on their welfare. 400 officers have been undergoing training for weeks at the college, which is the second location of the SWAT personnel training in the country. Business owners in Ilorin, Kwara State capital in north-central Nigeria, have been counting their losses after looters attacked their shops at a mall and some other areas. Close to 39 shops were looted, in addition to a government warehouse with food items carted away. However, a 500 million naira funding has been announced by the state government for affected traders.
For days, youths in Ilorin, the Kwara State capital in the north central, joined the EndSARS protests, which had spread across the country, calling for the special anti-robbery squads to be disbanded over allegations of police brutality and other forms of rights abuse. The protests had been on for almost 2 weeks in some parts of the country, presenting a fertile ground for those with ulterior motives to hijack it. The aftermath is devastating, even in Kwara State, with looting and vandalization of public and private property as the rampaging youths ransack government warehouses to loot foodstuff and other materials. A private mall located on Fate Road in the state capital suffers the same fate as youths force their way in, looting close to 40 shops. A nightmare for those who say they had been seeking legitimate demands from the government. They do what they can to help the cleanup process.
Us as individuals and as youths and as government officials need to also do our part to make Kwara great again.
In the meantime, at a meeting with Governor Abdulrahman Abdulrazak, the business owners lament the challenges they face as they try to resume their businesses.
If you have income coming in, whatever loss that you have incurred, you will be able to regain with time. So for us, first and foremost, the most important thing is how we can get the mall back.
The governor sympathizes with them, pledging a 500 million naira recovery fund to get their businesses back on stream, while talks are ongoing with banks to offer the owners interest-free loans.
When we look at the data you've sent in and your claims and so on, some have insurance, some don't have insurance. So see those will give grants to, and those will give interest-free loans to. So we're also speaking to 1 or 2 banks who will make the funds available interest-free and a long amortization period before you pay.
While they await the state government's intervention, the shop owners turn their attention to getting the complex house in their shops back in shape as they look forward to putting the events of the past few weeks behind them, though they know it's something they won't forget in a hurry.
Still to come on the program. An Egyptian collector amasses over 100 vintage cars. We'll give you details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. The head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, says he is self-quarantining after someone he had been in contact with tested positive for COVID-19. The 55-year-old former Ethiopian health minister, however, says he is not showing any symptoms. Dr. Tedros, as he likes to be known, is the first African head of the WHO. He has weathered bitter criticism, most notably from the US, of his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which the WHO declared a public health emergency of international concern on January 30th. Meanwhile, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has terminated its COVID-19 cash transfer program in Uganda. The U.S. Embassy in Kampala says the decision follows the Ugandan government's indefinite suspension of giving directly a non-profit organization that was conducting the program. The program was to benefit 120,000 Ugandans who lost livelihoods because of the coronavirus pandemic. Each beneficiary was to receive 100,000 Ugandan shillings every month for 3 months. Uganda has so far confirmed over 12,700 coronavirus cases with 112 deaths. Zimbabwe's First Lady, Auxilia Mnangagwa, has denied links to gold smuggling and challenged the police to produce any incriminating evidence against her. The First Lady also denied illegal dealings with Henrietta Rushwire, who's a suspect in a high-profile gold smuggling case, who was arrested last Monday while carrying 6 kilograms of gold in her hand luggage at the Harare International Airport as she was traveling to Dubai. Police said Ms. Rushwire did not have the necessary export permits, but she denies the charges in court and is awaiting a ruling on her bail application. Mrs. Mnangagwa also absolved her son from links to gold smuggling in the country. South Africa's newly crowned Miss South Africa 2020, Shudufadzo Musida, says she's using her reign to draw attention and probably influence positive change on attitudes and conversations regarding mental health in the society. Miss Musida, who was crowned on the 24th of October, visited the seat of government, the Union Buildings in Pretoria today, where she was received by the Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Thembi Siweya. The month of October was declared Mental Health Awareness Month in South Africa with the objective of not only educating the public about mental health, but also to reduce the stigma and discrimination that people with mental illness are often subjected to. Miss South Africa 2020 says she intends to address issues of mental health since it is a taboo topic in Africa at large and hopes to collaborate with the government to raise awareness and improve understanding about mental health issues.
I think for me, it's just about the very beginning, the core of it all, which is the conversations that we have among, like in our societies. Right now, the conversation of mental health is engaged with not to rehabilitate our society, but rather to shame. And I think that needs to change. I think when we start with how we speak to one another and how we engage with one another, a huge change can come about. Now, it also comes to the programs that exist in bridging the gap between access to mental health care and the people that are suffering from mental health care. So those are the kind of programs that I'd want to focus on, because I come from a rural area where people do not have access to basic mental health care. It's not even something that is even spoken about. And to bridge that would be a very, very important step in the right direction.
For the lovers of vintage cars, this story might just interest you. An Egyptian collector has amassed over 100 vintage cars, including a rare Auburn. The car enthusiast collects vintage vehicles, some dating as far back as 1900, displaying them at an exhibition in Cairo. Take a look.
Syed Sima says he was around 25 years old when he began collecting vintage cars, attracted by their beauty and rarity and also being relatively cheap. More than half a century later, Sima, a nickname derived from the Egyptian slang for cinema, says he now owns hundreds of vintage cars, some of which he keeps in Egypt's media production city, where directors often rent the antiques for shows and films. Sima's oldest car is an Auburn, which he acquired in the 1980s.
This is, of course, a rare car, a car that is entirely a piece of antique. If you look, you can see that the whole car is made of wood and coated in steel. If you look here, this part is all made of wood, coated entirely in steel. The compartment is all made of wood, even the ashtray.
Sima remains fascinated by the way older cars operate. His 38-year-old son, Ayman, shares this peculiar passion. He grew up seeing his father's cars in movies.
I was born finding myself inside vintage cars. I noticed that my father worked with old cars, so I found myself interested in old models. I started liking its beauty and elegance. I also liked how I saw these cars on movie screens. I would see a movie and think, oh, it is our car.
Among the famous figures who once rode one of Sima's cars was former Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat, whose presidential car was a black 1975 Chevrolet Impala.
It sure would be nice to ride one of those. And that's it on Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.